Hi, Aqua Roomers. It's time for chapter reading. Yeah. Yesterday, we're reading about the dance at Grandpa's. So remember, there's Laura dancing with Uncle George, and there's Pa playing the fiddle. Now, Grandma is back there in the kitchen. I can't leave the syrup, she said. But Pa began to play the Arkansas Traveler, and everybody began to clap in time to the music. So Grandma bowed to them and did a few steps by herself. She could dance as prettily as any of them. The clapping almost drowned out the music of Pa's fiddle. Suddenly, Uncle George did a pigeon wing, and bowing low before Grandma, he began to jig. Grandma tossed her spoon to somebody. She put her hands on her hips, faced Uncle George, and everybody shouted. Grandma was jigging. Laura clapped her hands in time to the music. With all the other clapping hands, the fiddle sang as loudly as it had sung before. Grandma's eyes were snapping and her cheeks were red, and underneath her skirts, her heels were clicking as fast as the thumping of George's boots. Everybody was excited. Uncle George kept on jigging, and Grandma kept on facing him jigging too. The fiddle did not stop. Uncle George began to breathe loudly, and he wiped sweat off his forehead. Grandma's eyes twinkled. You can't beat her, George, somebody shouted. Uncle George jigged faster. He jigged twice as fast as he'd been jigging. So did Grandma. Everybody cheered again. All the women were laughing and clapping their hands, and all the men were teasing George. George did not care, but he did not have breath enough to laugh. He was jigging. Pa's blue eyes were snapping and sparkling. He was standing up watching George and Grandma, and the bow danced over the fiddle strings. Laura jumped up and down and squealed and clapped her hands. Grandma kept on jigging. Her hands were on her hips, and her chin was up, and she was smiling. George kept on jigging, but his boots did not thump as loudly as they had thumped at first. Grandma's heels kept on clickety-clacking gaily. A drop of sweat dripped off George's forehead and shone on his cheek. All at once, he threw up both arms and gasped, I'm beat. He stopped jigging. Everybody made a terrific noise, shouting and yelling and stamping, cheering Grandma. Grandma jigged just a little minute more, and then she stopped. She laughed in gasps. Her eyes sparkled just like Pa's when he laughed. George was laughing too, and wiping his forehead on his sleeve. Suddenly, Grandma stopped laughing. She turned and ran as fast as she could into the kitchen. The fiddle had stopped playing. All the women were talking at once, and all the men teasing George. But everybody was still for a minute when Grandma looked like that. Then she came to the door between the kitchen and the big room, and she said, The syrup is waxing. Come and help yourselves. Then everybody began to talk and laugh again. They all hurried to the kitchen for plates and outdoors to fill the plates with snow. The kitchen door was open, and the cold air came in. Outdoors, the stars were frosty in the sky, and the air nipped Laura's cheeks and nose. Her breath was like smoke. She and the other Laura and all the other children scooped up clean snow with their plates. And then they went back into the crowded kitchen. Grandma stood by the brass kettle, and with the big wooden spoon, she poured hot syrup on each plate of snow. It cooled into soft candy, and as fast as it cooled, they ate it. They could eat all they wanted, for maple sugar never hurt anybody. There was plenty of syrup in the kettle and plenty of snow outdoors. As soon as they ate one plateful, they filled their plates with snow again, and Grandma poured more syrup on it. When they had eaten the soft maple candy until they could eat no more of it, then they helped themselves from the long table loaded with pumpkin pies, dried berry pies, cookies, and cakes. There was salt rising bread too, and cold boiled pork and pickles. Ooh, how sour the pickles were. They all ate till they could hold no more, and then they began to dance again. Didn't it sound like Laura and the children got to have dessert before dinner? That's pretty cool. But Grandma watched the syrup in the kettle. Many times, she took a little of it out into a saucer and stirred it round and round. Then she shook her head and poured the syrup back into the kettle. The other room was loud and merry with the music of the fiddle and the noise of the dancing. At last, as Grandma stirred the syrup in the saucer, it turned into little grains like sand. And Grandma called, "Quick, girls, it's graining." Aunt Ruby and Aunt Docia and Ma left the dance and came running. They set out pans, big pans, little pans, and as fast as Grandma filled them with the syrup, they set out more. They set the filled ones away to cool into maple sugar. And then Grandma said, "Now, bring the patty pans for the children." There was a patty pan, or at least a broken cup or saucer, for every little girl and boy. They all watched anxiously while Grandma ladled out the syrup. Perhaps there would not be enough. Then somebody would have to be unselfish and polite. There was just enough syrup to go around. The last scrapings of the brass kettle exactly filled the very last patty pan. Nobody was left out. Wow, look at that. All the food on the table. Oh, I think that must be Pa with the ham. Oh, and there's Grandma. And all of the children are getting the maple sugar. Yes. And look how she does her hair. It's very different. This was a long time ago. Okay. The fiddling and the dancing went on, and the other Laura stood around and watched the dancers with Laura. And then they sat down on the floor in a corner. The dancing was so pretty and the music so gay that Laura knew she would never get tired of it. All the beautiful skirts were swirling by, and the boots went stamping, and the fiddle kept on singing gaily. Then Laura woke up. She was lying across the foot of Grandma's bed. It was morning. Ma and Grandma and baby Carrie were in the bed. Pa and Grandpa were sleeping rolled up in blankets on the floor by the fireplace. Mary was nowhere in sight. She was sleeping with Aunt Docia and Aunt Ruby in their bed. Soon everybody was getting up. There were pancakes and maple syrup for breakfast, and then Pa brought the horses and the sled to the door. He helped Ma and Carrie in while Grandpa picked up Mary and Uncle George picked up Laura, and they tossed them over the edge of the sled into the straw. Pa tucked in the robes around them, and Grandpa and Grandma and Uncle George stood calling, "Goodbye, goodbye," as they rode away into the big woods going home. The sun was warm, and the trotting horses threw up bits of muddy snow with their hooves. Behind the sled, Laura could see their footprints, and every footprint had gone through the thin snow into the mud. Before night, Pa said, we'll see the last of the sugar snow. And we had a sugar snow. Yes, that snowfall we had. I wonder how many farmers were out in the woods collecting the extra sap that came from the maple trees. Ooh, the next chapter. Going to town. Remember, Laura and Mary have never been to a town. They've never seen one. After the sugar snow had gone, spring came. Birds sang in the leafing hazel bushes along the crooked rail fence. The grass grew green again, and the woods were full of wildflowers, buttercups, violets, thimble flowers, and the tiny starry grass flowers were everywhere. As soon as the days were warm, Laura and Mary begged to be allowed to run barefoot. At first, they might only run out around the woodpile and back in their bare feet. Next day, they could run farther, and soon their shoes were oiled and put away, and they ran barefoot all day long. Wouldn't that be fun? No shoes all spring, no shoes all summer. Every night, they had to wash their feet before they went to bed. Under the hems of their skirt, and their ankles and their feet were as brown as their faces. They had playhouses under the two big oak trees in front of the house. Mary's playhouse was under Mary's tree, and Laura's playhouse was under Laura's tree. The soft grass made a green carpet for them. The green leaves were the roofs, and through them they could see bits of the blue sky. Pa made a swing of tough bark and hung it to a large low branch of Laura's tree. It was her swing, because it was in her tree, but she had to be unselfish and let Mary swing in it whenever she wanted to. Mary had a cracked saucer to play with, and Laura had a beautiful cup with only one big piece broken out of it. Charlotte and Nettie and the two little wooden men Pa had made lived in the playhouse with them. Every day they made fresh leaf hats for Charlotte and Nettie, and they made little leaf cups and saucers to set on the table. The table was a nice, smooth rock. Doesn't that sound like a fun way to play? You could do that. Yes. Suki and Rosie, the cows, were turned loose in the woods now to eat the wild grass and the juicy new leaves. There were 2 little calves in the barnyard and 7 little pigs with the mother hog in the pig pen. In the clearing he had made last year, Pa was plowing around the stumps and putting in his crops. Wow. And that is the swing that's in Laura's tree. Oh my goodness. I wonder if that was hard for Pa to make. Stiff rope and a board. Wouldn't that be fun? Yes. So, tomorrow we will read, oh my goodness, a lot is going to happen. Tomorrow's chapter will be lots of fun. Until next time, boys and girls, thank you. Hope you liked it. Bye.